How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Cold Front Report. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Bills' third linebacker position and what kind of implications it's going to have for their defense in the 2021 season. We'll be right back. And we're back. What's going on, everybody? I hope you're all having a wonderful evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about who will be the Bills' third linebacker for their 43 defense. I got two of my friends joining me tonight. First and foremost, EJ Daniels. EJ, how you doing, man?
I'm great, man. Another opportunity to speak to the Bills Mafia. Today is a great day.
Absolutely. And Travis Blakesley. Travis, how you doing?
Great. Another Sunday closer to opening week.
That we are. One Sunday closer, one more show of the Cold Front Report. So last year, the Bills did not run with three linebackers a lot. They really didn't. They didn't run three linebackers a lot, and who they put out there more times than not as that third linebacker when Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano were both healthy was veteran A.J. Klein. And I'm sure everybody on your screen right now has plenty of opinions of A.J. Klein. But before we get into A.J. Klein and his performance last season and what we think he's going to do next season, let's talk about what we think really would be an ideal player with the ideal skill set to perform in this Bills defense as that third linebacker. Travis, I want to start with you.
Well, really, you're looking for somebody who is going to give you a little bit more help on the inside as far as tackling, eating up blockers. So, unfortunately, when we lost 57, Alexander, it's no secret why I feel like our defense took a step back in regards to stopping the run, and also having somebody with the versatility that Alexander had to come off the edge, to rush the A gap. Somebody's versatile, but also is able to stick their nose in there and make a play.
EJ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, as I said to you guys off air, I thought the perfect linebacker would have been Jabril Cox, who's currently with Dallas. Bills actually looked at him and talked to him before the draft too. So somebody that can play both those roles, similar to what Travis was saying, somebody that can rush the A gap, just cause some havoc, and then also somebody that can cover. I don't think the Bills currently have that linebacker, but that would probably be their perfect linebacker in a perfect world.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both of you. And the one thing that I said kind of before the show was that I don't really think they have that player on this team, which is why you really see multiple different players with various different skill sets that can be put out there in various situations to whatever best fits their skill set. Look at a player like AJ Klein, who's a very forward-moving player who doesn't really drop back into coverage well, but he does attack very well. So for those A-gap situations, he could go in there and be that blitzer, like he was more times than not this backstretch of last season. Or you can look at a player like Terrell Adams, who can drop back and cover a little better, or a player like Markel Lee, who kind of goes unnoticed, but in my opinion was more so brought in for special teams. But he kind of does have that pass rush element to him. He kind of was used in that role in the past, so he could potentially be used in that role here in Buffalo. But all of us pretty much agree that a player does not really exist on this Bills roster that fits that mold for that third linebacker position, ideally, really. So in my opinion, it wasn't really it didn't seem to be a priority in the offseason to really add that linebacker that you can throw out there and be that you can run base defense more times than you did in seasons past. It didn't really feel like that was a priority for the team. It didn't seem like that was a position they were necessarily targeting, as you saw them sign two lower-end free agents, in my opinion, in Terrell Adams and Markel Lee. And we'll get into our thoughts on both of them. But that wasn't really a priority of theirs going to the offseason. They had a player like Lorenzo Alexander in the past who, in my opinion, kind of near the end of his career really was a luxury, not only in that locker room, but on the field, being a player that, was capable of sometimes dropping back into coverage. Obviously, he was a little older, and he was used more so as that attacking linebacker towards the end of his career. But earlier on, he was capable of dropping back into coverage more so than you would expect of a 260-pound linebacker. But let's get into AJ Klein and how we feel about his performance in 2020. EJ, I want to start with you. What were your thoughts on AJ Klein and how the Bills used him, and if it was adequate or not, or if you think that he'll be a useful tool for the Bills defense this season?
I feel for the production that they got out of AJ Klein, I feel like they got their money's worth. As Travis was explaining to me off air, they were forced to thrust Klein in a situation where he had to contribute more than they would have actually liked him to. And Bills Mafia certainly let their voice be heard with how well they thought Klein was playing. He was a liability in coverage. I know every time the Bills dropped back and the running back came towards him, I know we all collectively cringed when we saw that. But as I mentioned, towards the end of the season, he started playing better. It culminating into Seattle Week 9, where he was like the highest graded linebacker, in the NFL, or like top 3, something like that. But he had a really good game. And then in the Chargers game, he also had a really good game. And so towards the end of the season, I think he played really well. But overall, I think the Bills could, sign a rookie or one of the guys they just signed and get average play. He only graded out at a 46. So, you plug pretty much anybody there and you can get, average play out of that. But to answer your question specifically, I think the Bills got what they paid for and then some, due to the fact that he had a couple games where he graded out high and he played pretty solid in the playoffs. So I would say they got their money's worth.
Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, he unfortunately got thrown into a role which I don't think the coaching staff and Brandon Beane envisioned him having to step into, let alone, first quarter of the season. Also, his contract also is always on my mind when I see his play, because like you said, we picked up guys like Terrell Adams for a fraction of the cost, and I really feel like they could both be interchangeable. Starting with, the obvious. He missed a ton of tackles. He was really bad in space. And like EJ said, he was a liability in coverage. He lacked that sideline to sideline speed. How many times did we see him trying to run a defender down from the edge and, they beat him to the corner? But that being said, he was tied for team high in sacks. we didn't have a ton of sacks, but that's still something. This is a guy who was supposed to do spot duty, and he ends up leading the team in sacks. He made a few big plays in key situations in those 2 games that you mentioned. And like we both, all 3 of us mentioned prior, he started to play better as the season went along. And I think that is in direct correlation to having Milano and Edmonds get healthier, and his role has been more defined and reduced.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you with the correlation of his play improving to coincide with his role not necessarily diminishing, but more so fitting a player of his skill set. At this stage of his career, and honestly, at any stage of his career, AJ Klein has not really been an exceptional player in coverage. At any point, he has primarily been used and best used when he is moving forward, when he is attacking, when he is seeing the ball and he is getting the ball. Whether he gets through free all the time to blitz, that's one thing. AJ Klein, we talk about that Seattle game in which he had a couple sacks, and Travis was kind of talking about how he led this team in sacks, and I really don't take that for much. I really don't value that much from AJ Klein. I wasn't expecting him to lead this team in sacks, but there's no reason why the Bills don't have a pass rusher on this team that can get more sacks than a spot duty linebacker. Really, that's not really what I'm looking for AJ Klein to do. If he's an attacking player, that's great. I love to see him come in there and fill that role when he is asked to. But you want to get sacks from edge rushers. I want this team to be able to get pressure from their front four like the defense is designed to do. I'm not saying that the linebackers can't get sacks or that's a bad thing. But what I am saying is the Bills need to have a better presence in pass rush aside from AJ Klein. And aside from that, AJ Klein really wasn't all that valuable to the team when dropping back into coverage. He was a situational linebacker. And, you can say what you will about situational linebackers. They all have their roles. They're designed to come in and play their niche. And as AJ Klein found his niche, he did find value for this team, which is really why you can kind of reason as to why he's still on this roster. Because I don't agree with EJ when he says the Bills got their money's worth, because they paid about $6 or $7 million for an old linebacker that can't cover in 2020. And if you ask me, that's way too much for a linebacker who is very limited in what he can do on the field between the lines. And there was a lot to be left on that field for AJ Klein in 2020. I was one of the people that harped on him, and I understand that Milano and Edmonds going down early in the season wasn't really part of the plan, but you need to have that part of your plan. You need to have players in reserve roles. You had AJ Klein. You also had Terrell Dodson, who was a more athletic player who's more capable of dropping back into coverage. And just because AJ Klein wasn't really capable of doing that, it's not like you brought him here with the expectation for him to be able to do that. He was still your fourth best linebacker, or third or fourth best linebacker, and that's not really excusable, to be quite honest with you. I think that's kind of mismanagement of the position, which is why you saw them bring in 2 more linebackers this year. And kind of whether they're going to contribute to this team or not, they still have way more depth than they did last season, and they're not going to end up in the same position that they did last season, thankfully, because you have 2 players that Markel Lee and Terrell Adams are both better in coverage than AJ Klein. So if both Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano go down week 1 like they did last season, you're not going to see them trot out AJ Klein into coverage. I really don't think you will. You're not going to see him pass second down. I really don't think if they're going to utilize AJ Klein, they're going to use him in that role, quite frankly, ever, or they should, because I think he's a liability in coverage. You really don't want liabilities in coverage on this defense, because the way it's designed, when you're running so much nickel, you really have 2 linebackers that are responsible for their zones and one who is a complete liability, such as AJ Klein. That's really invaluable, and that's a huge problem in the middle of your defense. And I really hope to see his role kind of diminish in that aspect. Rather, he's primarily, quite frankly, I think he's going to be utilized a lot for veteran leadership on special teams. That's really what his role kind of is. That and being a situational pass rusher, a gap attacker, if you will. But EJ, tell me what you think. Do you think AJ Klein is going to necessarily have a better season this year than he did last year? Or do you think that potentially being put in better positions to succeed, putting him into ideal roles for his skill set, do you think that would potentially lead to Bills fans having less of a sour taste in their mouth from AJ Klein?
Absolutely. That's all about the NFL. That's period, putting your players in positions to succeed. Again, as Travis had mentioned to me, he was forced to be put in a position where, he had to contribute on a high level. And if he's able to come in and attack the passer, attack the offensive line, do what he needs to do, cause havoc, then I'm fine with it. But like you said, if he's asked to drop back in coverage, cover linebackers and tight ends, then we it's gonna be tough. But again, as you mentioned, they brought in 3 other linebackers who pretty much do the same thing that he does. I honestly would not like to see AJ Klein on the field for a significant amount of snaps, to be honest with you. But you know how the Buffalo Bills operate. They love those old veterans. They love those older guys. They love the guys that they're comfortable with. And I personally feel like the Bills have fumbled when it comes to the linebacker position, especially in the draft, when they could have got, a younger linebacker like a JOK where they could have ran base and nickel pretty much at the same time if you really thought about it. But instead, they go with, lower end free agents who, do the same thing that AJ Klein does. So I think the Bills have mismanaged this position, to be quite frankly, when it comes to the third linebacking spot. But if we're counting on AJ Klein to make that same impact that he did in 2020, I think the Bills defense is going to be in rough shape.
I tend to agree. Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, statistically, I don't think it's going to cut. If he comes close to what he did last year, then we're in trouble because that means he's being forced out on the field, like he was last year. Last year was pretty much the worst case scenario, linebacker wise. We got two guys who can play, and they both got hurt early. So no, I don't see him having the same type of statistical success or lack thereof that he had this year. But I kind of think that it was good for the organization and him what happened last year because we really got to see the full litmus test. Like, we know what he can do, we know what he can't, and hopefully he'll be on the sideline more often. And when we do use him, maybe it is short yardage, maybe. And when he is on the field, we're just asking him to shoot a gap, keep it simple, go downhill. And that's when he was at his best. So, and also depending on the guys that we're going to be talking about later on, does he even see the field? Now, I think his contract, he's pretty much on the team no matter what. But, I hope, I think the Bills are better off the less we see AJ Klein on the field.
He'll have his opportunities to contribute though, and if he can do that,
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, be like a 6-man equivalent to basketball, like a 6-man or a 7th guy off the bench that can come in, give you 10 points and go sit down, then fine. But again, as everyone said, if we count on him to give us 25 plus a game, I'm using basketball analogy now. If we're counting on him to give us 25 points, 30 points a game, then we're gonna be in rough shape.
Yeah, and Evan Zinger in the comments, he hits a nail on the head here. You guys really shouldn't have to simplify things for a guy you just gave $13 million guaranteed to. And I think that's really where the sour taste really comes into play. That's where it comes into play for me because I understand bringing in your guys. I really get it. I'm not really against them bringing in former Panthers, but I'm against them bringing in former Panthers for heavy price tags. And AJ Klein was one of the heavy price tags. As was Vernon Butler, as was Star Latulippe, and the list can go on. But if he wasn't making what he was making, I wouldn't have half of issue with AJ Klein that I do. But moving on, going into this season, they brought in 2 linebackers, and the one that I think everybody on this panel is a little more excited about is Terrell Adams. I'm really excited for what Terrell Adams can bring to this defense. I think, he fits that athletic mold that the Bills are looking for in certain situations from that third linebacker position that doesn't limit you against the pass, and you can still have a contributing player against the run. EJ, what are your thoughts on Terrell Adams going into 2020 or 2021, excuse me?
Well, I'm looking at his PFF grading profile, and seems to be a pretty good tackler and is a solid pass rush guy. The thing that sticks out to me the most, though, is that when called upon to cover, he can actually do it and be average at it. And that's what you want. You don't want somebody that sucks in coverage, because if you have someone that sucks in coverage, they're just going to attack it. In today's NFL, they're just going to attack it religiously and relentlessly. But this it shows here that, he can cover solidly when asked to. And that's the thing. If you're going to trot a third linebacker out there, there's not many teams that is playing, base defense. The Bills played the least amount in the league, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it remains to be seen in preseason how much we're going to be actually relying on these guys, but it will be nice, and it is nice, to trot somebody out there who you don't think will be a liability in coverage. So, looking at Terrell Adams' grading profile, he looks to be a solid tackler, solid coverage guy when called upon. And if you give me that, if you can give me average play at that third linebacker position, you can definitely be valuable in this defense.
For sure. Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, he can certainly play. I'm pretty high on him. I'm excited to see what he can do in this defense. He's still relatively young. He's 29, 6'2", 225. He ran a 4.6. so he has that quick, rangy mold that fits the modern linebacker in today's NFL. It seems like McDermott likes to have those guys. It's just guys who can do multiple things. He is a solid tackler, and despite his size, he's not afraid to go downhill with it. I was watching some of his tape, and there were plenty of times when he's able to get to the hole, he doesn't back down, and he's a solid form tackler, which is something you don't see a lot in the NFL. He has the ability to rush the passer. And the one thing I really love that I was surprised what I saw is he's consistently going to strip for strips, even when the angles present themselves. So there'll be times where he'll get stuck in the wash and he'll meet the ball carrier 6 yards downfield, but he gets the angle and he's going straight for that ball. And he had a couple forced fumbles last year, which is something that. You're always looking for that edge, even if you're not able to make the play, which sometimes he does get caught up in the scrum and hung up on blocks. He's still, when he does get to the ball carrier, he's trying to get that ball loose. And having someone who, like you said, doesn't suck in pass coverage is something that is needed in this defense and in the NFL today.
Absolutely. And really, when you look at Terrell Adams, your common fan really doesn't have much to go off of for Terrell Adams, because he's been on 11 teams in 2 years, and he went from 20 tackles to 125 and one. And you're really left wondering, well, how does that really happen? Because he was thrusted into a role last season in Houston, and he kind of took advantage of it. He was a very opportunistic player in that regard. He went out there and he was a linebacker that could play sideline to sideline. He was attacking. He could drop back into coverage. And as Travis was mentioning, he has a knack for the football. And you see a lot of the word that I like to use for Terrell Adams is potential. I see a lot of potential for Terrell Adams. The Bills potentially could have something with him. He really didn't have much to speak of before last season. Then he came out on the scene and he got out of Houston. And that wasn't really a favorable position for any football player. And now he comes to Buffalo, where, you look at the role that he's going to have to play in this Bills defense if they choose to play some more base. It could be a very ideal position for Terrell Adams if he is capable of doing the things that he flashed in Houston, being able to drop back into coverage, attacking the gaps, attacking the edge, attacking the football. If he can do all of those things here in Buffalo almost as well as he did in Houston, we're looking at a potential steal that the Bills got for their defense, and opening up the availability to be able to run your base defense is huge for this team, because, we really saw it when teams really wanted to run the ball on the Bills, they could. And now if they can bring out 3 linebackers, they have 3 players, then they're not really opening themselves up against the pass when they run that base package. That is a huge asset for this defense. That is a huge tool in your tool chest if you're a defensive coordinator. And I think Leslie Frazier, if anybody's capable, Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott, might I mind you, if anyone's capable of drawing some things up to make 3 linebackers work in their favor, I think it's these two. It's not really, I don't like to compare the Bills to the Carolina Panthers all too often. I think it's overdrawn. I think it's over talked about. But you look at how they kind of structure their linebackers in Carolina with Thomas Davis, Luke Kuechly, and then Shaq Thompson. It's quite similar to how the Bills are kind of molding this linebacker room at this time. And they're kind of just throwing darts at the dartboard, hoping that a player with a little bit of potential, such as Terrell Adams, could potentially turn into that third linebacker that they've been looking for, and they didn't really get him at a high price point. EJ, do you think that the Bills – do you think Terrell Adams could really be a surprise player for this Bills defense this year?
Absolutely, especially if he's given the opportunity to. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our segment, AJ Klein only graded out at a 45. So if you get anybody else in there that can just be average in that position, that's just valuable. That's valuable enough to win a championship. That's valuable enough to win football games. And I think he can play well enough to number one, not only get snaps, but to overtake anybody else like an AJ Klein, despite that ridiculous price tag that he has. I didn't know it was $16 million. I thought it was like a 1 year or something else, but I didn't know it was $16 million. But yes, to answer your question, he can definitely be put in a position where he can earn some snaps. He just came off of a pretty good year by his standards in Houston. So coming to a better team with better players in a better situation, you would hope that a player like that, like you said, Clayton, a player like that would flash some type of potential where the Bills can get cheap talent, and that's what it's all about in the NFL, getting cheap talent.
Maximizing the situation. Travis, what do you think Terrell Adams could potentially bring to this team? Do you think he's a surprise player that could honestly thrust onto the scene in Buffalo with the position he's in?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's definitely twofold because I'm very intrigued as him being the third linebacker, like we've been talking about. But what I can really truthfully say, based on his play last year and AJ Klein's play last year, is he's going to be a remarkable better stopgap if Milano or Edmonds goes down, because I think his traits really go much better and go actually hand in hand with both those guys, where yes, obviously you're going to get a step down, but you're going to get a guy who has the talent to do the things that is asked of him, not a square peg in a round hole. So that added extra of that you guys were mentioning, that there is that potential that he may butt into something good. That's the cherry on top. I'm just super happy that we have a backup who's making backup money that can actually fill that role as well.
Absolutely. And another linebacker that was kind of thrusted into a role last season when the pair of starting linebackers went down early was Terrell Dodson. And really from the things that I saw from Terrell Dodson, I saw also a player with a lot of potential, somebody that had a lot of athletic ability, had a lot of explosion, had really hit really hard. And I like that in linebackers. You see an explosive football player like that. It's a player that, can go out there and do his job and play fearless and play aggressive. And that's really what you want to see from linebackers, especially in this defense. So, Travis, real quick, give us your thoughts on Terrell Dodson and what 2021 could potentially mean for him.
Well, the thing about Dodson that I was really intrigued about is that he seemed to really earn his play. If I'm not mistaken, he was in some sort of off the field incident. I don't know quite what happened, but I think he kind of fell out of the graces of McDermott and really earned his way back onto the field and was rewarded. I think it was in Miami he played, and he made plays. Like there was times he flashed. He made a couple pass breakups. He got a sack. They didn't stick, but still there was controversy, and I just liked the way he brought an edge to the field. Now he is undersized. We have a small sample size, albeit he played satisfactory during that sample size. He's the kind of guy where we need to see more, but he's 23 years old. I think he turns 23 this month. He's young. Guys like him, guys like Adams are players you want backing up or potentially taking over that third round. They don't cost a lot. They're young, and they have the traits you're looking for. I'm not quite sure why we signed AJ Klein, to be truthful. I'm not sure why they gave that guy all that money, like we've alluded to. I'd rather keep the likes of Dotson and Adams to fill those roles.
EJ, what are your thoughts on Terrell Dodson and what this year can mean for him?
I really liked him. I went back and watched the Tennessee game because that was his highest graded game, Week 5. If you guys remember, that was the game where, Bills had a lot of players on defense that was hurt, specifically Trey White, and obviously Milano was hurt too. But I felt in that game, one thing I noticed is that, he was always in the right position, and that's a lot of what it is at linebacker. I mean, knowing what you're seeing and then reacting to it. Like, look at the Levante Davis, how quickly they can react to plays. There's a lot of times he was covering Derrick Henry out of the backfield, and he was there, and then he made a key tackle on Derrick Henry on a second down too. So I like to see that, alluding to Travis's point about he gets up there and he hits. I like that too. I did think he was a little flat-footed in coverage, a little heavy-footed. He is a thicker guy, so I remember watching. He had 3 reps against Ferkser, and Ferkser got him every time. So that's not something that you would like to see, like you said, in today's linebacking core, getting beat like that in coverage. And he almost got beat for a touchdown too on a corner route, but Tannehill missed Ferkser also. But I think he's really good. I think given more snaps, I think he can be more effective, especially like you guys mentioned, playing with better talent. I think he can also be better effective. He did have an off-field issue. Hopefully that's behind him. But I think giving more opportunities, giving more snaps, I think he can be effective. And one last thing that I saw from him is that he's able to fight blocks in the run game and make tackles. I did see that in the Titans game, and to do that against the Titans, who have one of the better running games, the better offensive lines in the league, that was very encouraging for me to see.
And you guys both referenced his off the field issues that occurred early in his career, and that happened right after he was signed as an undrafted free agent. And for the Bills to kind of get the whole story on a player like that before they come to a decision really kind of shows you what kind of thoughts they had of him inside the building, to like, okay, well, let's just let this play out and see how it works for this player because we think he could be something. And I really think that was their train of thought when it came to Terrell Dodson. And he really kind of hasn't proved them wrong at any point. Every opportunity he's been given, EJ gave a good synopsis of how his play in weeks past resulted, when he was given opportunities. And his heavy-footedness in coverage, I think, is also related to not having much experience, as he kind of alluded to. More snaps this guy's given, the more he's able to get out there and get experience, get reps, and be able to trust his eyes and what he's seeing, the quicker he can react. And he's a quick football player. He's fast. He's explosive, as I mentioned at the onset. So the more experience that he builds, you're potentially looking at a player that could build in confidence, that can build in skill set, that can ultimately end up being an asset for your defense. And that's really what you hope to see from a player like Terrell Dodson, who you brought in as an undrafted free agent. And now he's going into his third season with this team right now. He didn't play his rookie year, but he's going into his third year in the defense, in the scheme. So years under his belt to be able to learn and grow could lead to his potential coming to fruition and being that third linebacker that the Bills are looking for. And I think Terrell Dodson, honestly, is quite comparable to Terrell Adams. And the only difference between them, quite frankly, is the fact that Adams got the opportunity he had last year. And I think if you saw Terrell Dodson get an opportunity such as that in a place such as Houston, you could have seen potentially the same or similar things from those players. Only time will tell. And I'm really intrigued to see how these two specifically will battle out for that. I don't know if you want to call it third linebacker spot. I think at the moment when they go in there in the camp, it's going to be that fourth linebacker spot. But I think potentially, competition makes these guys better. And if these three players, Terrell Adams, Terrell Dodson, and then AJ Klein, are competing every day, you could potentially see the best version of one of these three rise to the top. And I think that's the most exciting aspect because regardless, I think, in my opinion, you have a lot of potential with Adams and Dodson potentially being that third linebacker in this defense because of their athletic profiles. And that's something to be excited for. That's something to really look out for this training camp and preseason. In these two games, these are two players. These Dodson specifically, he didn't get an opportunity in preseason last year to flash what he has. So Dodson's a player I've been waiting to see in preseason for 2 years now, and I'm really excited to see what he can bring to the table. And lastly, Markel Lee, who they brought in this past offseason. And in my opinion, I think Lee is going to be more so of a reserve type player and play special teams primarily. But he certainly has an athletic profile. He has snaps under his belt. He has experience. So he brings something to the table for this defense if one of those two first linebackers were to go down. EJ Daniels, what are your thoughts on Markel Lee?
Looking at his grading profile here, like you mentioned, he doesn't have any snaps in 2020, but he has snaps in 2019. Played for the Raiders. Looking at his grades, he's a solid tackler. So again, this looks like the Bills again just throwing resources at one of those less valuable positions, and Markel Lee is a part of that. And I just wanted to mention one thing on a macro level. Look at what the Bills have been doing with these less valuable positions like running back, like linebacker. Signing and throwing multiple bodies at it instead of signing one big key guy. I mean, you got Milano, obviously, and you got Tremaine Edmonds. But, I mean, at that third linebacker position, it's not as valuable as having a slot corner. So why not just go and sign, three guys who pretty much do the same thing and see which one sticks and let them battle it out for a reserve role? I mean, this just goes to show you, the smarts and the savvy and the willingness to accept analytics in some of your hiring choices and your signing choices when it comes to your players. So these moves just tell me that the Bills are on the right track. Specifically, the Bills' whole Bills organization and valuing certain positions over other ones just shows like how really good Bean has done with this team. Yeah.
Travis, what are your thoughts on what Markel Lee can bring to the table this year and what his role might be?
Well, like EJ alluded to, I think he's going to be primarily a special teams guy. But the interesting thing about him was in 2017, he actually beat out Terrell Adams and won the starting middle linebacker job. He got injured early on, and then they signed, I believe, Navarro Bowman, and he took over. But it's a guy who actually played next to Adams and beat him out in camp. So he's a bigger guy. He's 6'3", 240, so he's a little taller, a little rangier. So he may give you a little something else, because most of outside of Edmonds are shorter. But like I said, he earned a job, and he outplayed Tyrell Adams, albeit 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think really with Markel Lee, it's another player you can use that P word for, potential. You're signing him on here, and I understand. I said at the onset that I think he's going to he's going to be primarily a special teams player for this team, and that really has a lot to do with the fact that you don't really know what he's going to bring to the table with the linebackers in front of him, quite frankly, because you look at a player like AJ Klein. He's established in the league, and like EJ mentioned earlier, they're comfortable with AJ Klein, so he is going to have his spot on this team and a spot in the defense when his number is called. You look at a player like Terrell Adams, who has last season under his belt, had really good production in Houston, and flashed a lot of potential. I think Adams is a stick for this roster, as do I think Terrell Dodson is a stick for this roster. He's been on this team for 3 years. He is, I wouldn't say established in this defense, but he certainly has a role to play for in this defense, having those starting snaps, having film with this team, having experience under his belt in the defense. I'm curious to see what a player like Markel Lee is really going to offer for this team, because he's a player, he's very similar to Terrell Adams, in my opinion, and how he can, he's slightly more limited in coverage than Adams is, but he's also capable. He's capable of rushing off the edge, but he's limited in that aspect as well. He's not the biggest thumper, but he's not afraid to go on the gap, but he does get beat in those situations at times. So overall, he's a player that really needs to improve in every aspect before you can really rely upon him in key situations in which the Bills may need a third linebacker. I think that, this is really going to be one of the more exciting positions to watch in camp. I understand you have your two solidified players in Edmonds and Milano, but that third linebacker spot, we just named 4 guys, 3 of which are really have underdog stories coming into this roster and coming into camp that are going to be competing for that spot. 3 guys who really are going to be competing for not just a starting job, but potentially even just a role on this team. That is really going to bring out the best in these players. And I'm excited to see what that really means for each of these individuals, because personally, I think it's going to result Markel Lee being a special teamer. And in my opinion, I think Terrell Adams is going to be the player to watch this training camp. And I think he's going to surprise a lot of people in what he's capable of and what he's going to bring to this Bills defense. EJ, what are your thoughts? Who do you think is going to be the Bills' third linebacker this season and have the biggest impact of these 4 players?
Well, as you mentioned, Terrell Dodson is probably the one they're most comfortable with. I mean, obviously AJ Klein from Carolina, but in terms of someone who has been in the defense, and not only been in the defense, but played some significant snaps at some point last year. So I think Terrell Dodson is it. I think he has the most upside out of all these guys. I think he has potential to be an average to solid linebacker if given the opportunity. So that would be my choice.
All right, Travis, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think our true third linebacker is going to be Taron Johnson, but when we actually decide to bring a linebacker on the field, I mean, I truly, I don't know if it's more hoping or actually believing, but Adams, he's the unknown. He has the most experience under his belt as far as, starting from week 1 to week 17. And the other thing is, at least one of these guys that we're talking about that we all agree has some shot to play. They're not going to be on the team. One of these guys, at least, So we're gonna be in a much better position regardless, because we're gonna be cutting guys who actually have experience versus, coulda, woulda, shoulda, undrafted free agents and 6th and 7th round draft picks. So if I had to, gun to head, I would pick Adams as our third linebacker.
Guys, it's really a position. not necessarily a luxury, because we saw what not having that third linebacker available to you does to this Bills defense. It can really throw them through a whirl, especially when you're going to be playing teams that run the ball, that primarily run the ball. That can really limit you on your defense. And like Travis said, I think really the third linebacker primarily will be Teron Johnson or Saran Neal or whoever they choose to throw out there in their nickel packages. And, whether you're going to see a third linebacker a lot of the time or not is yet to be determined. But I will say this. I believe that you're going to see three linebackers more this season than you saw last season, primarily because I think it's going to be more available to them. I think they're going to have a player that they're more comfortable in those situations to throw out there on rundowns, to maintain that gap, or have a better tackler, or have a better a person who's more responsible for their run defense than Teron Johnson. And what it does is it gives you availability on defense. It doesn't limit you in your personnel and what you're capable of doing. It opens you up to being able to do what you need to do in the situations that you're going to need to do those certain things. And really, I'm excited to see who's going to rise to the top of this position. It's going to be a competitive position. It's really one to watch, in my opinion. I really think that this competition, it's going to have a lot more implications of the Bills' defense and what they're able to do this season than a lot of people really think. And I want to thank these guys for taking the time to coming on the show with me and giving their thoughts. As always, it's a pleasure going live with Travis and EJ as we've done the last couple of weeks. I'm really getting a feel with these guys, and it's a lot of fun. Travis, tell the people where they can find you if they choose to. It's been fun. Tell them where they can find you, where they can follow you, and what you have upcoming. You're muted.
My bad. You can find me at Trav Blakesley on Twitter, and I think this Sunday evening podcast is really working out. So hopefully see you guys on the weekend again.
Yes, sir.
EJ, I know you're doing double duty tonight, so tell the people where they can find you shortly and permanently.
Yeah, so shortly I'm going to go on with the great Joe Miller at 9 o'clock. We'll be talking some AFC East rankings for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and O-line. So I'm excited for that. And then you can find me every single day on Twitter at eDaniel77. I'm here for all the hot football takes. I love it. I love this Sunday night podcast because it's just like a lot of topics that people aren't really thinking about, but we get them ready. For training camp, we getting them ready for preseason. We already in preseason mode, so keep listening to us, keep supporting us, and we'll have you ready for everything Bills.
Hot off the press.
And anyone who's a Tupac fan at EJ.
Oh, he remembers that.
We're not talking about the Raptors yet. Not yet, EJ. Maybe after we cut it. But be sure to follow the Cold Front Report anywhere and everywhere. On Twitter, it's at Cold Front Report. On Instagram, it's at Cold Front Report _Bills News. And on Facebook, be sure to like our page so you stay tapped into everything we have going on. We have shows almost every day, it feels like. It's a pleasure going live with these guys every weekend when I get the chance to. It's a pleasure. What these guys are doing on our platform, it's more than appreciated, and they're doing a great job of it. I really encourage you all to watch whatever we have going on, whenever it's going on. It's really good content, and it's really good Bills discussion, as EJ was talking about. You can like us on Facebook, Buffalo Bills Cold Front Report. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at CFR Clayton. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy. Go Bills.